Test, 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 test. Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Services Committee meeting. The meeting will start in 60 seconds. If you feed me, I'm a much nicer person.
Good evening and welcome to the Public Services Committee meeting. Call this meeting to order. Review and approval of the minutes.
I would move approval.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, first off, Dean has been so patiently waiting. Next time I think we're gonna have to text you and tell you when we're starting so you don't have to wait so long, darn it. So thank you for waiting patiently. Fire Marshal Dean Lanier will be discussing the 2015 International Fire Code Amendments Review. Take it away.
Thank you. Dean Lanier, Fire Marshal with Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. Thank you for your time to stand and talk a little bit about the 2015 International Fire Code adoption. We start off this process along with the Building Services Department in going through new ordinance revisions with the new release of codes. It is on a 3-year cycle. This year we've taken the time to do a lot of homework and a lot of work prior to presenting this code to you for adoption. There are some interesting things within the new language that we'll be adopting in. Within that, I did try to summarize a lot of the information. In total, the fire code is probably 300 to 400 pages worth of text. It's quite a long document, and some have asked. Yes, I have read it.
All of it?
All of it, yes. I am embarrassed to almost have to admit that. But in large part, in looking through it, the changes that have really been made have been made to kind of bring in some of the challenges and the features that we see being employed in the market today. And those are the things that I will highlight. I did provide you a change document and a summary document, but I actually pared that back some more today for the slide presentation, just to try to be respectful of your time. So the principles of fire life safety, let's talk about. This code has this language within it. It talks about the intent of a code to establish a minimum requirement and provide a reasonable level of safety and property protection. And this is to provide protection for both safety to occupants, firefighters, and emergency responders during emergency operations. That is the focus and purpose of this ordinance, to try to achieve that goal. I would tell you we do that within a larger strategy that we employ with Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. In large part, I would tell you our strategy works well. We've got the analytics to prove the numbers work out right. I think it shows both in from what you've seen recently in our ISO rating to our accreditation process that the things that we do work, and they work well. I'm comfortable with the numbers that we provide you are accurate and are a clear representation of how we perform in relationship to other cities and how well we do in relationship to our own metrics of how we track fire loss within the city. Our strategy really depends on these 4-5 principles that I've outlined here. We have reduced fire loss in our community. To put it in some kind of context, this year we ended off 2015 with a fire loss of right about $5 million. I would tell you, though, that if you reflect back during the summertime, we had one single apartment fire on a 3-story apartment that had significant damage to it. That apartment alone represented almost half of that loss within that $5 million. So it was a significant number to the overall fire loss within the community. In total, though, in total fire responses, though, we have a number of about 150 fire responses every year. That number since 2005 has stayed reasonably the same. It doesn't necessarily go up that high. It doesn't necessarily fall off that much. And I believe that's because of a couple of different reasons. But with all those metrics being the same, we are well within what we believe is a great number. We stay well within the average for the regional average of fire loss. We stay well within the national average for fire loss. To give you a good example, we would need to have at least 3 apartment fires of the same size every single year to be on our average for fire loss for regional and national average. So it's pretty interesting to note that you would have to see quite a lot of damage within the city to be on average, for both from a regional standpoint and from a national standpoint. So the strategy is something that we work on, and we try to make sure that we're doing enough of the right things to keep things on that same trend line. I have pared the notes back quite a bit to talk about just a few things that we think are significant. The first has to do with our assemblies within the City of Sioux Falls. Code requirements are mandating that the larger assembly buildings within the city start taking some actions to account for security and safety of the public as they come in and out of these venues. Now, we are not talking about smaller bars and restaurants. Really, the threshold is those places that can accommodate 2,000 and more public attendees, and we already eliminate out of that places of worship. So we're not talking about those occupancies. What we are talking about are places like the Pentagon and the Denny Sanford Premier Center, the district, and venues that are larger venues that can hold larger concerts and larger events. Within that, the expectation of the code is that we do more things to account for planning and preparation for those larger events, and we make sure that we have enough personnel on site to accommodate for security and safety of those people. And that's really what this Group A occupancy provision is trying to provide. It expands on top of that and talks about the seating plan for these type of events. How do you put a seating plan together? The requirements are that you provide us with clear avenues of egress for all the occupants to go out, that you've done your math and you've accommodated for enough avenues for people to stand up and walk out of the event. In other words, you can't walk into a room and the place is filled with chairs for 2,000 occupants from front to back and with 6 inches of egress space to get out. That's not a fair accommodation of having enough egress space for a large assembly of over 2,000 people. So the code is requiring them to provide an occupant limit as well as have a seating plan as to how many guests can you put in chairs sitting on the floor for an event. In addition, it provides for announcements for safety. You may have noticed that if you go into a theater now, some of the theaters will actually provide you a safety message of where the exits are within the theater prior to the event starting. This is becoming more of a push, and it actually is starting to become an industry standard before it even showed up as a provision of fire code. So most of the industry has already started to do this. I think they have some security concerns with some of the things we see on TV and are already providing for those security concerns long before we ever adopted this into code. We also have to have a fire evacuation plan. Now, I would tell you it seems common sense that we would be ready and prepared for if we need to evacuate a large assembly building. It is not a small endeavor to try to get 2,000 people to all stand and move in unison towards exit spaces within a larger occupancy. but it is, we've seen a lot of study done about human behavior when we're in large event venues like this, and people really do need direction. So having a fire evacuation plan that's pre-planned out, that talks about what responsibilities security has, what responsibilities do we have to make sure that egress spaces are open and available, and how to plan all come together are really key points that we're trying to make sure that we enforce and encourage our larger venues to make sure they have. Staff training is another key issue. What we have done, the City of Sioux Falls and the state of South Dakota does not have its own staff training plan. In turn, what we've done is we've actually gone out to another state. They've offered us the opportunity to use their training program as a in-kind, and they've offered it to us for free. So we offer that as an opportunity for the city venues to go in and have free training for their staff. It goes through all the key objectives that are outlined in code and provides their staff with a training certificate that validates that they not only took the training, but they had a test that tested their knowledge against that. We've provided that to them for free. It's at no cost to them, and our expectation is that we'll still be able to continue that and hopefully be able to develop something of our own into the future. There is something that was kind of different. Nowadays, you see this as a means of producing electricity within some areas of the city. You'll notice that there are some buildings around the city that have solar voltaic power systems. They are these large black solar panels on top of buildings. In code, this was something that has been moving towards this outcome to make sure that we're providing for the minimum life safety when those panels are used on top of a structure. They do have higher levels of electricity than what you would find in a single family home. So they do represent a bit of an electrical hazard to firefighters if you're on top of a roof and you happen to come across this. These are higher voltage systems and can be a hazard to firefighters. Assembly occupancies on rooftops. There's only a few examples that you see now, but we have seen plans come across through fire prevention that are moving in this direction, where you would have a assembly area of 300 occupants or more in a rooftop space. So this is a little bit of an odd issue. You haven't seen a whole lot of it, but we expect more of it to happen. When those kinds of rooftop gardens are being used and the occupancy is over 300, the code is just requiring that the spaces below that, if it's 4 stories or 6 stories, are sprinklered. Really, in essence, they would have been sprinklered anyways, but it's reinforcing the requirement that if you're going to have these large assembly occupancies on these elevated buildings, that you sprinkler the spaces below that, so that people have the opportunity and ability to escape. The last thing I wanted to talk about was our emergency access for 1 and 2 family housing developments. This was something that had continued to come about in prior discussions with council about our access provisions. What we did was we worked through with the IRAB committee and we took what had previously been in policy and we worked on the language, and we are proposing it as a code adoption for putting it directly into the code. It will have requirements for providing emergency access, what the surface has to be. Signage requirements will also be within that, and the road maintenance of these emergency access roads. They will be clearly marked within the city now, and there should be little confusion about what role they're playing with regards to are they for regular commuter traffic or are they for emergency? So it's something that we thought was a good step. We did the legwork to make sure that it was going to pass through our IRAB committee. They voted and were able to support it, and now we're looking for this language to be adopted into code. With that, if you have any questions for me, I will do my best in answering them.
Councilor Sagers?
Yes. You mentioned in your presentation that the word security from time to time. am I to take that very literally in regard to beyond just fire, but also people coming and causing problems? Are you getting involved in that?
You know, in large part, what security is playing a role of, not only for the security of those folks that are attending the event, but also security in the case of you need to evacuate the place because of a police effort or a large event happened within that. And how many people do you need for the number of attendants that are within that structure? About the only place that calls out for that is the fire code. So the fire code has some rules as far as based on how many attendants you have, how many personnel do you need for safety and security? What's the minimum?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Councilor Rupenbach.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate this report. First of all, thank you for the last point. To me, that shows leadership in that you've taken the message of this council. When we talk about that extra access, it needs to be very clear for people in new developments. This is how the emergency vehicles are getting to you until we have a larger, and the roads are built and all of that. I really appreciate that action on your part and on the part of your team. That's awesome. Question then about, I want to, first of all, I apologize, I have not read the entire fire code, and so it's on my reading list, but
It ranks right up there with War and Peace.
right, yeah. When I have a sleeping problem, then I'll get after it. But my question is, what does Group A mean when you talk about those levels of, and then I have a follow-up to that.
Group A's are our assembly occupancies within the building, within the city. Really, we're talking about churches, large event venues, our larger restaurants and bars, all fall into that Group A or assembly occupancy type.
Okay, so you talked about the change in the code, the proposed change in the code is for evacuation plans to be more clearly stated and for certain levels of, occupancy of a building. And then you said, except for places of worship, we're not going to require that evacuation plan. Can you talk about that? We have some churches that are way over 2,000 people.
We do. And, the irony of that is many of those churches have already contacted us and talked to us about, okay, we understand what we are responsible to do. How do we do this? So in many cases, we've already engaged with them and talked with them about putting together an evacuation plan. We were able to bring together some resources so they could plan that out. But yes, if they don't have up to 2,000, based on the recommendation we have, they would not be required to have this evacuation plan. But many are just choosing to go ahead and do it anyways. It's really just about taking care of people and understanding that's a lot of people to try to organize and have them move in a way that's thoughtful and has some emergence about it in moving them towards exits. That's a large number of people. That's a challenge.
Well, and it's your point is well taken that when people are under stress in that way, they need to be told very specifically, like a 4-year-old, okay, now you're going to do this, and now you're going to do this, right? So my question is then, are you comfortable not putting that in code? Should it be in code?
I'm comfortable with the 2,000 threshold. We will have conversations with the folks that have larger venues, and we have concerns about how are you planning for a large congregation to move towards the exits if you have any type of issue during a service. We are going to have those conversations with them and encourage them. There's limitations on what we can enforce, but we can certainly encourage them and provide them almost a pre-planned document of exactly how to put the whole thing together. We've gone almost so far as we almost have a script that they can take and just plug in their facility, and it is almost a pre-written evacuation plan for them. So we recognize that 2,000, how do we come to that number? Did somebody have a coin flip and that's where it lies? But, in large part, that threshold of what we can enforce, I think that's a good place to start. Okay. If we start to see nationally challenges and problems with that, then I think that's where code is a fluid process, and there is input to change it over time. So there very well may be revisits of that 2,000 threshold and say, well, should we draw that down some more? Do we have the ability to extend it even further, or where are we at and how is it working?
Okay. Madam Chair, I have one other, if I might. My final question would be about, I know that Sioux Falls has done in the past an exception to the sprinkler rule when it comes to multi-housing, and I apologize, I can't remember the numbers for that either. But can you help me understand, are we talking about that in this process, or how are we doing sprinklers for multifamily?
There's no language in this code revision that directly is going to affect that 6 units and above. Right now, the fire code applies to 6 units and above for apartment buildings. That anything below that level would not have sprinkler requirements. Anything above that would. Right now, I can tell you from, I look at the overall numbers of what we're doing from a fire loss, both from a residential standpoint and from a commercial standpoint. I can tell you that there's a stark difference between sprinklered buildings and non-sprinklered buildings. Just to reinforce that message, the apartment building down on just south of Empire Mall that we had this summer, that was not a sprinklered building, and it's 3 stories. So in large contrast, if you look at this in totality, those sprinklered structures, I know you don't see it on the evening news. Do we have fires inside of them? Yes, we do. We absolutely do. What do we find when we go to that building and there's been a fire in one of those? Generally, one occupant is out of a room for a night. The remainder of the occupants go back into their apartments, and within a week or two, that occupant is back in that building again. And that's been a consistent script that we find over and over again. But in the buildings that are not sprinklered, we talk with building owners and management companies about what to do. We're pretty clear and consistent with them about, the kind of risk that they're looking at. The last apartment fire I think you could look back to is up on 6th Street. There was nothing unique or different about that structure other than it was a little bit older, but there was significant fire extension in that building and into the structure. And once it's into the structure and into the walls, the ceiling, that kind of thing, now we are talking about significant damage and higher fire loss.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you.
Councilor Anderson?
Dean, going back to the apartment building behind the Empire Mall, after taking a look at that after that fire, why was that building not required to have sprinklers?
That was a decision made based on what current code in the 2012 International Building Code required. So there was not a provision already in the code that we could enforce to make them sprinkler it at that time.
Okay.
I believe with the new 2015 ordinance revision, that would not have taken place. So that is something that's being addressed within this 2015 ordinance revision. I can check on that and confirm that.
Sure, just to refresh my memory on this, where is the standard on when an apartment building has to sprinkle?
Generally, we're talking about more than 50% of the structure has to be renovated and redone, or if it's a change in occupancy and use. Those are the 2 decision points that ordinance allows us to provide for sprinkler coverage within a facility. If it doesn't meet those 2 criteria, then there's really not a lot of language in ordinance for us to be able to make that requirement.
Okay.
What's the number of units required? You have to have so many units?
You have to have 6 units and above for us to even begin the discussion of sprinklers. I can tell you if we look back at all the legacy buildings that have been built over the years, code has gone through a growth period in which, maybe 30 years ago, we only applied for, 5-6 story high-rise structure buildings. But over time, we figured out that there are different different thought processes we can use to how we're doing that construction and how we're deploying sprinklers. I think as we move along and we learn even more, I think industry as well as those who are responsible for code enforcement will start to come to some kind of equilibrium about the whole subject of sprinklers, and especially with regards to apartment buildings.
Go ahead, Councilor Anderson.
Okay, Dean, let's go back to your last screenshot when we were talking about the emergency access points.
Yes, sir.
And the change in the fire code for that.
Yes, sir.
Now, what is going to be the final result of this as far as how many homes are going to be the starting point for this emergency service or emergency road? How long does that road stay in place? And then what's the next starting point when there has to be a permanent secondary access into a development?
So the 1 and 2 family subdevelopments, the threshold is 30 units. At 30 units, the developer is responsible for showing us the secondary access in. We had discussed within several meetings with single one-on-one meetings with developers about making every 30 units the stopping point for bringing secondary access in. After some discussion back and forth, we decided not to go there. We didn't have a whole lot of support for that concept. So we have the 30-unit threshold now. We have a better puzzle, I would tell you this. We are able to control how the concept plans are developed through their construction plans. So I am a little bit more comfortable with the idea that we will not see some of the things that have happened based on 2007 and up to this point. We have far better oversight of those areas. We have far better oversight of the concept versus the construction. We've developed a mapping layer as well as a procedure to track all those units through our new land management software. So in large part, my opinion is that we've put some procedures and processes in place so that once we even get to 30 units, that discussion has already occurred, and the secondary access in is a temporary road that provides relief for the developer, and that's where we kind of left it at. There was some language within previous policy that talked about that 5-year maximum time before we would force them to change it over into a commuter road. After a lot of discussion back and forth, I didn't include that within that language, principally because I thought we could manage it within the framework of workflow processes and oversight that we have on it right now. I'd be more than willing to show you what things we've put in place now to make sure that the ruling of the 30-unit maximum is followed, and then as these subdevelopments come together, we no longer have these isolated areas where there's only one way in and one way out.
But there is no structure between our fire ordinance and our regular ordinance that dictates when a second permanent access should be established. Am I correct?
So there are requirements within the subdevelopment and the engineering design standards that would require commuter access in and out. Exactly what those thresholds are, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I know that there are subdevelopment requirements based on the engineering and design standards for every subdevelopment. But I'd have to go back and do the research to find out exactly what those are.
Have you had any support from our planning and building services on this
Yes.
action?
Yes. Director Cooper has been directly involved with developing this and getting this in front of IRAB committee, along with our city engineer, Chad Huey. So we've had quite a bit of involvement and discussion with this over the last year, especially You know, we've even sat down one-on-one with developers within the city to find out how can we put this thing together so that we don't have to have the same symptoms of some of the problems that we've had over the last couple of years. I really wanted to stop it at that point and never have to experience that kind of pain again. So I think we have a good plan. I think we have the good workflow processes in place to be able to piece the puzzle together. I'd love to be able to show you the kind of changes that we've made from an oversight standpoint of things that I know now that I couldn't say we knew in 2005 or 2007.
If I can just make a statement then. Dean, I'm happy to see the work that you've done on this. You know, we've struggled as a council and, you know, individually to make sure that the safety of our citizens in these developments is taken care of. And if there isn't a jump-off point between the fire code and the ordinance, then I think that's something that I would say the council needs to address with the planning department, because I think we were very, very straightforward with our feelings and with that development that we had the problems with, and seeing some of the other areas in the city, 97 twin homes in a circle with one driveway out. Those are the type of things that I definitely do not want to see. And I understand that there's a new way to develop out there, but that we still have to fill that gap from that 30 homes to when we have to say you have to have a permanent secondary access. But I do applaud the work that you've done up to this point, but I do think we have a lot more work to do.
Thank you, Councilor Erpenbach.
I just wonder if it would be appropriate, Madam Chair, to have Dean come next month and walk through those things that, you know, let's look at that progress. You know, in addition to we're talking about, you know, new codes and all of that, but let's talk about that progress and let's put some quantification to it so that we understand more clearly as a council where we've come from. And
Sure.
then kind of, if you can give us a vision, Madam Chair, if you could also provide us some vision for where you think we're headed, you know, but those changes that we have made so dramatically in the last several months, I think would be good to, let's articulate it in a public meeting. I think we need to do that.
We'd love the opportunity to come back and show you what we've done over the last 2 years to try to bring the whole concept together. There are a lot of competing interests in it. So to be honest, it wasn't the easiest process to get through, but we've gotten to a point where I think we have a much better workflow and capability to referee and make sure that we're providing the emergency access that's required. I would tell you that we are very serious about it. It does get the fire chief's attention as far as access and the ability to get to a scene. It is a highly graded criteria for the effectiveness of our operation, and it's something that he takes very seriously, and I echo that same sentiment.
Great.
Are you thinking, just continue the discussion, are you thinking at an informational next?
No, I think this committee is a fair place to have it,
You to
to
do
have
it
that
again.
conversation.
And if I may ask a few questions in regards to the emergency, or make a statement as well. The emergency access, you know, we as a council have for 2 years lived and breathed the poster child of Canterbury Heights, and it's unfortunate that that is what really formed our opinions and shaped it. I understand what you're doing. I understand the groups that you've had to kind of make everybody make happy. At the same time, I think without having that 5-year max time of a permanent secondary access, I'm not sure if it goes far enough. So maybe a higher, just really break down that emergency access, since that was such a big issue for all of us, to really talk about that, what specifically is in there, so we can highlight that to people that are in new developments, and maybe got to know some of the folks that dealt with that particular development and issue, because that was 10 years or I mean, it's been a long time
Been a
coming.
long time.
And it's hopefully in the process of being fixed, and we'll move on. But I would like more information specifically on that to see how we can strengthen it and bridge that between fire and ordinance, the code between the two. Couple questions. My first one is how do you intend to get the word out about all the changes? What's your strategy with that?
So something that we've worked on over the last years, we do go out and we conduct inspections on all the commercial businesses within the city of Sioux Falls. Something that we've offered for the last couple of years. We provide business owners a checklist of exactly the items that will be inspected when we come to their occupancy. We have that information posted online. One of the things that we've made a transition over time to electronic inspections. We provide digital copies to the business owner of their inspection right on the spot. We're really trying to work with business owners to increase our level of compliance on the very first visit. In large part, we believe that fits within our larger strategy of the higher levels of compliance that we have on our first visit, the less likely we are to have higher levels of risk. So we've worked hard to try to make sure that people understand exactly what we're looking for, and we answer all of their questions and try to make sure that we're doing a good job of informing them before we even make a first inspection.
Okay. And then is this adopted at the state level?
Actually, there is a movement underway. I believe it's in one of the houses right now to adopt the 2015 code.
Okay.
There was some talk between myself and clerk staff about that bill passing through, but I don't know exactly where it's at.
Okay.
As far as where it's at in Pierre.
Okay. And then will you go back and review the current venues? Will you go through the event center? Will you go through all venues that meet this criteria to make sure that they're up in compliance, or is it kind of just as we move forward?
No, we sit down with them individually and start working through those plans. In most part, we have already developed most of those resources, so we basically give it to them as a package and coach them through that process to get them to the point where they have a well-developed plan and they understand exactly what their responsibilities are. I think in large part, the industry kind of already has started moving this way. Principally because of the security concerns from any number of different threats, including terrorism. So in large part, my view of it is most of the industry already started moving this direction long before this language ever began in code.
All right.
So they are already taking these steps to make sure that they're providing for security during these large venue events.
Perfect. And I have one more small thing going back to the emergency access. The last development that we talked about, it was in policy that they do a permanent secondary access road after that 5-year time period. What if they choose to not do it? What safeguards are in place that the city will enforce this? Is there anything that makes that stronger so that it's not, oh, sorry, 10 years didn't happen?
This was a discussion we had. Because it doesn't originate in my section of ordinance, I would rather defer to the city engineer to talk about specifically how we would get to that point if we were pushed to that point. There's some things that we've talked about, but it's something we would have to work together, both from planning, engineering, as well as fire, to be able to execute. Right. And it's something that we've never done before, so it's a tough issue.
All right, we have about 2 minutes until we have to wrap her up. Go ahead, Councilor
Quickly,
Anderson.
I would like to say that we need to probably invite planning to be here at the next meeting to discuss the permanent point, and also your question as far as if they decide not to. The council was proactive on that a couple years ago, where we require the developers now to put up a bond. And that bond can be used to take care of those issues if it ever comes up.
Sounds good. So you got your assignment for next month. We look forward to seeing you back here again.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Move to adjourn.
Any open discussion fast?
Sorry.
That's okay. No open discussion? Okay, Councilor Urbanbach.
Second.
All right, we are adjourned.